Back in the days when I was writing television drama and casting actors in a couple of TV series, I could tell you the moment when the actor got the part. With Audra McDonald, who was already a Tony winner, it was when she walked in. She owned the room before speaking a word. With another actor, it was when he leaned on a word in a line in a very surprising way that I didn't expect when I wrote it. And with someone else, it was when she smiled through lines when others were fighting back tears over those same lines. And so, leaning on my now very much faded authority about the audition process, I have the strong suspicion that in Todd Blanche's audition, he got the part when he said this.
As to whether or not I want this job, I did not ask for this job. I love working for President Trump. It's the greatest honor of a lifetime. And if President Trump chooses to keep me as acting, that's an honor. If he chooses to nominate me, that's an honor. If he chooses to nominate somebody else and I go back to being the DAG, that's an honor. If he chooses to nominate somebody else and asks me to go do something else, I will say, thank you very much. I love you, sir.
I don't know that I've ever seen anyone more afraid in front of a Justice Department microphone. I mean, he sounded kind of terrified there, but I love you, sir. That was the moment. That was Todd Blanche's audition moment that got him the job, because that was the moment when Todd Blanche, Donald Trump's former criminal defense lawyer, now is acting attorney general, and as of late last night, Donald Trump's nominee to be the next Senate-confirmed attorney general. That was Todd Blanche saying to Donald Trump, I will do anything for you. I mean anything. That was Todd Blanche debasing himself publicly in his audition for a Trump cabinet post more desperately than anyone else in Trump world who has ever engaged in the process of publicly begging for a job from Donald Trump. Republican senators confirmed Todd Blanche in his first Senate confirmation proceeding as Deputy Attorney General. Todd Blanche did not do so well in the nonpartisan evaluation he submitted to in a Manhattan courtroom, where he defended Donald Trump against 34 charges of business fraud in Donald Trump's scheme to pay off the porn star Stormy Daniels, to buy her silence about her very brief encounter with Donald Trump in a hotel room when Donald Trump's third and current wife was home with their 4-month-old baby. Stormy Daniels testified under oath to that jury of New Yorkers who believed her. Donald Trump did not testify in his own defense. That left his defense in the very weak hands of Todd Blanche, who managed to get Donald Trump 34 guilty verdicts from that jury, who decided beyond a reasonable doubt that Stormy Daniels was telling them the truth and Todd Blanche was not telling them the truth, and that Donald Trump was, in fact, very, very, very guilty. So Stormy Daniels was more credible with that jury than Todd Blanche. Todd Blanche's lies work with most Republican senators and most Republican members of the House of Representatives, but they have never worked anywhere else, as that jury showed. Utterly stupid, morally wrong. Those exact words came from the former Republican leader of the United States Senate, Senator Mitch McConnell, who will have a vote on Todd Blanche's Senate confirmation. And this time, Senator McConnell might not be as sure a vote for Todd Blanche's confirmation as he was the first time, because on May 21st, Senator Mitch McConnell said, so the nation's top law enforcement official is asking for a slush fund to pay people who assault cops. Utterly stupid, morally wrong, take your pick. So there's Mitch McConnell, still one of the most important players in the United States Senate, saying Todd Blanche, in his official conduct as acting attorney general, has been utterly stupid, morally wrong. And that is why, when the current Republican leader of the Senate, John Thune, who learned the ways of leadership under Mitch McConnell, was asked today if Todd Blanche will have a hard time getting confirmed as Attorney General. The Republican leader said, quote, "Hard to say." That is not what Republican Senate leaders usually say when a Republican president nominates an Attorney General. They always greet the nomination enthusiastically and guarantee confirmation. And there is usually no reason for the Senate Majority Leader to think there will be any problem confirming any member of the cabinet for the president. But today, John Thune is saying, hard to say about Todd Blanche. Senator Thune said, "This is an environment where nothing's a safe or sure bet these days. It is the same environment in which enough Republicans in the House of Representatives defected yesterday to join the Democrats in passing a war powers resolution to stop Donald Trump's war in Iran. In the United States Senate, Republicans already joined Democrats in a vote on a similar war powers resolution that passed the Senate against Donald Trump's war in Iran. And so, in, as John Thune put it, an environment where nothing's a safe or sure bet these days, Todd Blanche is now being offered to Republicans in the United States Senate as the next poisonous vote Donald Trump is asking them to cast. Especially poisonous for Republicans running for re-election in the Senate facing strong challenges from Democrats. Those Republicans running for re-election will be asked to vote to confirm the architect of Donald Trump's slush fund, who is also the architect of Donald Trump's amnesty from prosecution for any tax crimes he may have committed in the White House up to now. We heard last night on this program, with the breaking news of Todd Blanche's nomination, that Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, thinks it's possible that Todd Blanche's nomination will not win enough support of Republicans on the Senate Judiciary Committee. Senator Whitehouse went down the list of Republicans on that committee, and he mentioned, among others, Senator John Cornyn of Texas as one of the possible defectors, especially after Donald Trump supported the scandal-plagued Attorney General of Texas against Senator Cornyn in the Republican Senate primary, which Senator Cornyn lost. So Senator Cornyn is now one of those Republican senators who was defeated in his re-election campaign by Donald Trump himself. And now, the day after Sheldon Whitehouse identified John Cornyn as a possible vote against Todd Blanche, CNN's Manu Raju reports, Senator John Cornyn told me he's undecided on Blanche as AG. Being Attorney General is probably one of the hardest jobs in the cabinet because you're working for the president, but you're also supposed to be able to tell the president no. So we need to talk about that. In his Senate confirmation hearing, will Todd Blanche be able to credibly tell Senator Cornyn that he has ever said no to Donald Trump about anything? The oldest United States Senator, 92-year-old Chuck Grassley, is the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and he used the old math today to calculate the chances of Todd Blanche's Senate confirmation.
Based on the proposition that every Republican on the committee voted for him less than a year ago, and based on the proposition that every Republican senator voted for him a year ago, the answer is yes.
Yes, Senator Grassley's right. If every Republican who voted for Todd Blanche for Deputy Attorney General votes for him for Attorney General, he will be confirmed. But today, John Thune said that's not the situation we're in anymore. And today, Senator Susan Collins of Maine, who's running for re-election, is one of 3 Republicans who voted against the Trump-Blanche slush fund on the Senate floor, a vote Senator Collins obviously believes she has to cast to be re-elected in Maine. So, can Susan Collins vote to confirm the person who Mitch McConnell called utterly stupid, morally wrong, as Attorney General, and defend that vote to Maine voters in November? Can she vote for the architect of the Trump-Blanche slush fund? Retiring Republican Senator Thom Tillis, who eagerly welcomed Donald Trump's cabinet announcements at the beginning of the Trump presidency, said this today.
I haven't made a decision yet. The key for Todd or anybody going through Judiciary Committee is being pretty tight on January the 6th. They better not have said for 1 minute that the people that beat up police officers like these right down here were righteous people. You come even close to saying that, you don't have a chair of getting my vote in Judiciary.
Okay, so if you're even close to saying that the Trump-Blanche slush fund can go to people who beat up police officers, Thom Tillis has promised to vote against you. So here is Todd Blanche testifying that people who tried to kill police officers would be eligible for the Trump-Blanche slush fund that Todd Blanche himself designed.
Mr. Attorney General, this is an outrageous, unprecedented slush fund that you set up. Simple question. Will individuals who assaulted Capitol Hill police officers be eligible for this fund?
Well, as it makes plain, anybody is
just let me know if they're eligible for the fund.
as was made plain yesterday, anybody in this country is eligible to apply if they believe they're a victim of weaponization.
Mr. Attorney General, let me ask you this. Are there going to be rules that say that if you've assaulted a Capitol Hill police officer or committed a violent crime, you will not be eligible? Why not make that a rule?
I expect that because I'm not one of the commissioners setting up the rules. I expect
you're appointing
that there will be
4 of the
rules
5
set up.
members, aren't you, Mr. Attorney General?
Pardon me?
You're appointing 4 of the 5 members.
I am appointing
You can
all 5
certainly
members.
set up the rules. I would hope you would make a rule that anyone convicted of assaulting a police officer or a violent crime is simply not eligible. They should not apply.
Well,
Let me ask you this, because you compared it to the Keepsiegel case. But I think you know full well that in that case, the settlement agreement was approved by a federal judge, including the payments to people who were not originally parties to the lawsuit. No federal judge has approved this fund, have they, Mr. Attorney General?
no federal judge did approve this.
If that's not good enough for Thom Tillis, then Thom Tillis is, once again, just not telling the truth about what will actually decide his Senate vote. The federal judge who was handling Donald Trump's sham lawsuit against the IRS, which Todd Blanche personally settled for Donald Trump by setting up the slush fund and by granting Donald Trump immunity from any investigation of his tax returns up to now, any possible tax crimes Donald Trump may have committed in the Oval Office on his own tax returns, has taken a new interest. The judge in that case has taken a new interest in the case and is forcing Todd Blanche and Donald Trump to explain themselves as to the question of whether the case should be reopened because the court was the victim of a fraud, meaning victim of a fraud by Todd Blanche himself and by Donald Trump himself. Todd Blanche is the only person in history to be nominated for Attorney General while a federal judge is investigating whether he participated in a fraud. For even a criminally minded president thinking about nominating Todd Blanche for Attorney General, once that judge last week announced an investigation for possible fraud involving Todd Blanche, a criminally minded president would drop the idea of nominating Todd Blanche as Attorney General, but criminally minded president doesn't begin to describe the pathologies of Donald Trump. And it appears that a federal judge investigating possible fraud involving Todd Blanche and investigating Donald Trump himself for possible fraud in that same scheme that Todd Blanche probably, right, assured Donald Trump would work. That would be a confidence-shattering moment for any other president, including a criminally minded president. But Todd Blanche's slush fund scheme and tax amnesty for Donald Trump has now gotten Donald Trump into much more serious trouble himself. You'd think that would give Donald Trump pause. Donald Trump is now being investigated for possible fraud by a federal judge because of Todd Blanche's failed plan. Why would Donald Trump hold on to the dream of Todd Blanche as a Senate-confirmed Attorney General? It turns out that pathetic public professions of, I love you, sir, go a very long way to convince Donald Trump that you will do absolutely anything for him.
You were paid $10 million to represent the president. You hang a 30-foot banner of the president's menacing face over the entrance to the Department of Justice. You said that if you were terminated or not moved forward as Attorney General, you would say to the president, I love you, sir. So I have one question for you. Is your obligation to the victims and survivors of Epstein's heinous crimes and all his perpetrators, or is your first obligation to the President of the United States?
So without a doubt, we want to bring justice to every victim.
When will you?
Leading off our discussion tonight is Democratic Congresswoman Madeleine Dean of Pennsylvania. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. Has Todd Blanche brought any form of justice to the survivors of Jeffrey Epstein's sex trafficking and rape?
No, none. And that's literally what I wanted to talk to him about. And I don't know if you know this, Lawrence, but I had a chance to speak to him on May the 14th. For some strange reason, the Department of Justice hand-delivered invitations, an invitation to me, as well as to my chief of staff and my comms director to come to a reception being hosted by the acting Attorney General, Todd Blanche. I noticed that no other members of the committees who were invited seemed to be going, or no other Democratic members seemed to be going. And I said, that's the reason I'm going. And so I went and we chatted and we talked Philadelphia and Philadelphia cheesesteaks and sports. And then I said, Mr. Acting Attorney General, I have a couple of questions for you. Number one, when are you going to complete the redaction of all the personally identifying information of the survivors? And he very immediately defensively said, we've done it. I said, well, actually, you haven't, and the news shows that. Number two, and he actually blamed the victims. He said, well, they didn't all tell us. So obviously, this man has no understanding of what it is to be trafficked, to be a victim or survivor in this place. Number two, I said, when are you going to release the rest of the documents? Because we've got 3 million more documents. You know what the Epstein Transparency Act says, and you're not in compliance. And he said, you know what? They're all duplicatives. And there's another guy named Epstein that we had to take out of it. Nonsense. But most importantly, to your question, I said to him, Mr. Acting Attorney General, when are you going to prosecute? So far, we have one dead guy and one woman in a summer camp. When are you going to prosecute those who victimized, trafficked, abused, raped girls and women, more than 1,000 of them? And he said, he blamed the victims. He said, well, they really haven't come forward with the names. I said, you're the top prosecutor in the country. I would think you'd be beyond eager to be prosecuting. Lawrence, that personal conversation, of course, I took with me to our testimony, but right then I knew the cover-up was complete.
The former Attorney General, Pamela Bondi, in her testimony, has now said everything involving the Epstein files and the Epstein investigation was delegated by her to Todd Blanche. Todd Blanche was in charge of everything. So every mistake, every name that, every survivor name that, and address and such information that was not redacted, that should have been, was all his fault. Everything that hasn't been released, all up to him. What is your reaction to former Attorney General Bondi's blaming Todd Blanche for all of this?
Incompetence, weakness. Wouldn't you say I was actually named and confirmed as the Attorney General of the United States? I must take ownership of what happened here, and I wanted to make sure justice was served. But obviously, that's not what happens around this president. I had a town hall this last week, Lawrence, at Ursinus College in Montgomery County. Maybe 140 folks were in the auditorium. People very upset around the Epstein files, very upset around the Iran war, and so much else that is going on that is so incompetent. And one person came up to me at the end and said, you use the word sycophants. that people like Pam Bondi and others are sycophants. He said that's too kind a word. They are shills. They are weak, hollow shills for this president. And look at the harm that they are doing to our country.
We saw in a couple of votes this week in the House, Republicans leaving the Trump position, and including on Ukraine, significant defection there. Do you see in that any possible trouble that would also erupt in the Senate for Todd Blanche's nomination?
I certainly hope so. I can't imagine his nominations should go forward. I don't know what you think. And I have to tell you, how many days, how many weeks and months and years have we said, what will separate Republicans from the corruption, the rot, the ruin? I said to Mr. Rubio, who was in front of us, I think it was yesterday or the day before, I'm now forgetting, yesterday, believe it or not, in foreign affairs. I said, this president will be remembered for rubble and rot. And what I can't believe is that it actually took the $1.8 trillion, billion dollar slush fund to have them separate in some way. I don't know why that was, and maybe someday you'll explain it. You understand these things better than I. But what was it that finally helped some of them break free? Of course, those who are breaking free are also, many of them are not seeking reelection. But why was it that level of corruption and rot was something that would separate them from this president? And again, it's only a handful. We need many, many more. But this election cycle will wash a lot of them out over on the House side as well. And we will begin to right this ship. But in the meantime, the rubble is what this president's going to be remembered for.
Representative Madeleine Dean, thank you very much for starting our coverage tonight.
Thank you, Lawrence.
Andrew Weissman will join us next. Here is Todd Blanche lying to the House of Representatives this week.
You just gave the president and his family a tax immunity to the tune of about $100 million.
Not true. It's not immunity. Okay, so it's not immunity. What it says is like any time the IRS settles with an individual taxpayer or another company as part of the settlement, it's standard. It's typical to get rid of past ongoing audits. It's not a forward-looking document. It's nothing that gives any sort of immunity in the future to the president or his family or his organizations.
He is lying. It is immunity. And the other lie there is that when the government settles a tax case with an individual taxpayer for something that happened 6 years ago, the government does not surrender the right to audit any tax matters after that event 6 years ago, which is what Todd Blanche has now done for Donald Trump. Todd Blanche's answer there to Representative Rosa DeLauro is an indication of just how difficult it will be for Todd Blanche to get through a Senate confirmation hearing without lying. Joining us now is Andrew Weissman, former FBI General Counsel and an MS Now legal analyst. He's the author of the new best-selling book, Liar's Kingdom: How to Stop Trump's Deceit and Save America. It's now a New York Times bestseller. Andrew, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Todd Blanche's explanation there about how routine it is that when the federal government settles a tax matter, it's not just for the tax return in question, it's for tax returns filed after that tax return.
So everything about that is preposterous in terms of what he is saying. I just want to make sure people understand why that is so ridiculous, not just for the reasons you said, Lawrence, but when you have a settlement, it is of the matter that is under investigation. Donald Trump was not settling the what supposedly is the ongoing audit of his taxes. You could imagine in that situation that Donald Trump then would say it would be, you pay X amount of money to settle this. And then the person is given sort of not quite immunity, but the idea is then you're done. In other words, the IRS isn't going to come back on the same matter and say, okay, I want to continue auditing you for the thing we just settled. And that is true in that situation. That would be done because you would have resolved that issue. That is not what this lawsuit was by Donald Trump. Donald Trump was complaining about a contractor at the IRS leaking his returns. You don't settle that matter, if this was a real settlement, by saying, oh, now don't ever go after me, my family, my companies for any money that we owe for taxes at any moment prior to today. That is what Todd Blanche did. It is so deceptive for somebody who is seeking to be the actual Attorney General of the United States to give that answer. It is so obvious that it is not seeking to tell the truth, seeking to understand his obligation to oversight by Congress of the Department of Justice.
What would you focus on in a Senate confirmation hearing of Todd Blanche?
That is a great question because there is a ton, but I think something that I would focus on if I were a Democrat that I think could appeal to Republican members of Congress looking at this are that Todd Blanche oversaw the Department of Justice when they sought to indict 6 members of Congress. They sought to indict 6 members of Congress who are part of the intelligence community or in law enforcement or the national security apparatus. They sought to indict them for asserting their First Amendment rights and speaking and saying that the military has an obligation not to follow illegal orders. I would ask him, how do you justify that? It is true the grand jury rejected those charges, but that's more reason to be skeptical of Todd Blanche's oversight, that he is so willing to do Donald Trump's bidding that he has sought to indict 6 members of Congress. What does that say about what the safety of the members of Congress to a future administration with Todd Blanche as the head of that organization? To me, that would be one of the prime things that I would look at. I would also point out that he is the same person who oversaw the Department of Justice seeking to have an open criminal investigation of Jerome Powell and the Federal Reserve. Also something that was rejected this time by a federal judge. Again, it is something that Republicans and Democrats in the House and the Senate thought was a just hideous idea, and it shows the weaponization. So those are 2 of the many, many things that you could ask him about.
Andrew, please stay with us. We're going to take our mid-show commercial break here. When we come back, I want to ask you about Donald Trump's choice as the acting director of national intelligence, an even more shocking choice than Tulsi Gabbard was. We'll be right back with Andrew Weissmann. Donald Trump, in reaction to the outrage at his choice of the completely unqualified William Pulte, who has publicly called himself the biggest degenerate, those are his words, to be the acting director of national intelligence, Donald Trump assured Washington, after it became clear that Pulte could never be confirmed to that job, that he will not nominate Pulte for Senate confirmation.
It's an acting position. It's not a permanent. He's not going to be permanent because, I don't think he'd want to be permanent, but he'll be very good. Again, it's not a permanent position. We're interviewing people right now, but it's somebody just to take it over for a little while.
Under the headline, "This man should not be in charge of national intelligence," the editorial board of the New York Times writes, "The law that created the Director of National Intelligence position stipulates that the office holder should have extensive national security expertise. Mr. Pulte clearly fails that test. Mr. Pulte, the head of a federal housing agency, is blatantly unqualified to oversee the nation's spies. He has no known background in national security. Two senators with long backgrounds in intelligence, Susan Collins, Republican of Maine, and Mark Warner, Democrat of Virginia, have said they do not even know if he has been authorized to handle classified information. It is chilling to think about how he might use his power as the Director of National Intelligence, a job that will give him access to sensitive secrets about Americans and foreigners alike. His appointment is a threat to the effective functioning of the intelligence community, national security, and the rule of law. Andrew Weissmann is back with us. Andrew, what could go wrong?
Just to put a foot stomp on something that you read there, which is that the law that created the position of the DNI, the Director of National Intelligence, says that you have to have substantial national security experience to be in that role. Why you would put somebody who has not just no substantial national security experience, but no national security experience is beyond me, when there's a reason that Congress stipulated that as a requirement. The DNI was created after 9/11. There was a bipartisan commission, an extraordinary commission. The report is really still today worth reading. And one of the lessons was that there needed to be oversight and greater speaking to each other within the intelligence community, because there were really dots that were not connected. And that was the idea of creating the DNI. It's an incredibly important position. It is a position that keeps our country safe. There should not be a moment where there is somebody in that position who does not have the requisite experience, whether temporary or permanent. The responsibility of the president, and here it's really, this is a story not about Pulte. It is a story about why the president would think it appropriate to have that agency overseen by somebody who is not the very, very best person for the job.
So this is the guy Donald Trump has used to investigate people who he doesn't like from his position in a housing position in the government. Now he's giving him the equipment to illegally, it would be, do it from an intelligence community perspective.
Absolutely. So we just were speaking about his lack of experience and the safety risks of that. That's one bucket of reasons why this is so inappropriate. And that's putting it mildly. Now this is a second issue, which is his weaponizing the housing department and just so people remember, that was the genesis for the failed cases and investigations of people like Letitia James. Where they were thrown out. Grand juries rejected the idea that there should be an indictment of Letitia James, not once, but twice. And so this is the individual who has seemingly the key requirement to be in the administration, which is not the expertise to keep the country safe, but rather the willingness to violate their oath of office, to continue the acts of retribution that we are seeing coming from this administration against people who are proven over and over again that they should not be charged.
Is there something that the intelligence community can do to protect its work from someone like this?
No. That's the short answer. When you are in the intelligence community, it is a hierarchical structure. If there is somebody put in who is your boss and they need information, assuming that it is being asked for and it is lawful, you will comply. Now, obviously, people should not and have an obligation not to do something that is unlawful, or if there are lawyers against their ethical obligations. But the idea that you could just hide things from your boss is not possible. That is not how you want a functioning government. The idea that you would put somebody in that position where that's even a question tells you how far we've come. And it's worth noting the DNI is not and should not be a political position. This is one where it's so anathema to the idea of the DNI and what they're there for to even think about politics. This is, there's a sort of an old saying that, politics ends at the nation's shores. And that when you're thinking about just keeping the country safe from foreign threats, that is a bipartisan issue. And so the idea that you put somebody in who's not just inexperienced, but has a record of weaponizing even the housing department in ways that we've seen. Now, this isn't speculation. It's been shown over and over again, is so emblematic of what we see out of this White House.
Andrew Weissmann, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
You're welcome.
And coming up today, the most incompetent Treasury Secretary in history could not come up with a word of defense for Donald Trump. That's next with Congressman Brendan Boyle. Once again today, we saw that Trump Republicans do not have a single word of defense to offer about Donald Trump's handling of economic issues.
I can settle how the American people are feeling about this economy because I have the data on it right here from Fox News just the other week on the president and this administration's handling of the economy. 71% of the American people disapprove, including 40% of Republicans. On the president's handling of inflation, 72% disapprove. They disapprove, in fact, by a 3-to-1 margin over approval. So do you agree with the American people, or are they just wrong?
Look, the American people were torched under the Biden administration.
Oh my God, I wish I had $1 for every time you or someone on the Republican side brought up Biden's name. If I did, I might have as much money as you have, Mr. Secretary.
Joining us now is Democratic Congressman Brendan Boyle of Pennsylvania. He's the top Democrat on the House Budget Committee and a member of the House Ways and Means Committee. Congressman Boyle, you would think that the name Joe Biden is not one they want to use, since the comparison on economics between Joe Biden and Donald Trump is so bad for Donald Trump now.
Yeah, the only answer they had, Lawrence, when I would cite the statistics talking about the fact that consumer sentiment is lower today than at any point on record, and those records date back to 1952, the fact that more Americans disapprove of the economy today than at any time since the Great Recession. I can go on and on. Anytime I would cite this or my Democratic colleagues would cite similar statistics, they would reply by saying Biden's name pretty much every sentence. If it were a drinking game, everyone would have been passed out on the floor about an hour into the hearing. So they literally have no defense for the Trump economy. They know it's failing. Their only hope, they believe, is to somehow con people into thinking it's Joe Biden's fault, despite the fact he left the presidency many years ago now.
So the Treasury Secretary was asked today in this hearing, do you agree, the American people, do you agree that they deserve the money back that the Supreme Court ruled is illegal, yes or no? To which Bessent says it's not a yes or no question. That's the tariff money that the Supreme Court said was illegally taken from Americans and American companies who paid the Trump tariffs because only Americans paid those tariffs. And Bessent can't even say whether Americans who paid the illegal tariffs deserve their money back, while a judge in New York is trying to get them their money back.
Yeah, and of course, he knows the answer is yes, but he also knows that he is performing ultimately for an audience of one. And so he does not want to in any way offend the very sensitive sensibilities of Donald J. Trump, because he knows that at any moment he could be dropped, just like other cabinet secretaries have already been dropped from both this administration and the previous first Trump presidency. So it ends up in which you have a number of people now in the Trump White House who every day debase themselves just for the privilege of getting to keep this rather awful job.
What is your sense of Donald Trump now losing his grip on House Republicans? We see you picking up House Republicans on a variety of votes now.
You know, the first crack was back in December when we saw House Democrats and a few House Republicans begin to break the dam with our discharge petitions. Several of them, as you may recall, succeeded in December and January. And I offered the prediction that perhaps this would be the beginning of more Republicans beginning to break from this White House. Sure enough, that pattern has continued over these several months and only increased. We saw, double digits number of Republicans vote with us on this Ukraine funding bill that just happened a few hours ago. And I would predict, Lawrence, as we get closer to this November, with a president whose approval rating is mired in the 30s, we will see more and more Republicans vote with us because they know their jobs are on the line.
Congressman Brendan Boyle, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Pennsylvania Congressman Brendan Boyle gets tonight's last word.